Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Really glad you're with us for the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We have a lot to talk about today. It has been a crazy week. Let's start with something that will always give us solace, and that is Democratic Party infighting and the fact that they are still reeling from, I think, what I would have to consider now shocking losses for them in 2024. They really thought they were going to do well. They really didn't, and the finger pointing has not stopped at all. So let's dig into that. First of all, Matthew Shao over at the Free Beacon, Democratic National Committee Chairman Ken Martin, who vowed to unify Democrats when he was elected 4 months ago, is facing a wave of internal backlash as critics say he has failed to lead a fractured party reeling from its 2024 election defeats. One DNC member called Martin, quote unquote, weak and whiny, while another said that the chairman has been invisible and that his early tenure has been disappointing, according to a report from Politico. Quote, the DNC is weaker than I have ever seen it. A Democratic strategist with close ties to labor unions told Politico, quote, they have shown zero ability to chart a post-24 vision for Democrats. Former Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel, who is weighing a run for president in 28, echoed the DNC members' frustration, saying we're in the most serious existential crisis with Donald Trump, both at home and abroad. No hyperbole there. And with the biggest political opportunity in a decade. And the DNC has spent 6 months on a firing squad in the circle and can't even fire a shot out. And Trump's world is a target-rich environment. And they go on to talk about the whole internal fighting over David Hogg. And we also have polling Jim from Reuters and Ipsos of self-identified Democrats that found 62% agree that the leadership of the Democratic Party should be replaced with new people, while only 24% disagreed. I'm not sure whether that means the DNC or congressional leaders like Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. My guess is that most rank-and-file Democrats have no idea who Ken Martin is, so I'm guessing it's the congressional leaders. But they're unhappy with their leadership from top to bottom. They can't get a message out, and they're completely distracted by their own infighting. So I'd say that's pretty good.
Yeah, and look, if you look at the problems of the Democratic Party today, as we approach the classic, stretch of summer. It's not quite 4th of July, but we're now nearly, 6 months into President Trump's second term. I think we can all agree it's all Ken Martin's fault. Half people, who? Yeah. Look, I am not going to spend a lot of time singing the praises of Ken Martin, but I'll just kind of observe he did just get there, right? And they've only had a handful of elections since then. They won the Wisconsin State Supreme Court race. That kind of was big and consequential. But generally, like if you measure the success of a political party, they're by how many elections you win. Well, there just haven't been that many elections. And we'll see. I think things are not looking great for Republicans here in Virginia. New Jersey is always a tough one. Maybe you could argue that the New York City mayoral primary that we've talked about a couple times in this podcast is a mess. By the way, I really think we should retire the metaphor of a circular firing squad when used to describe the Democratic Party, simply because they just don't believe in gun rights.
True.
And so they just, maybe a slap fight. Maybe that's the sort of thing they would do, but they're not doing that. It was Dave Weigel, I think, had a very sharp observation. Like when they've had things like winning the Wisconsin State Supreme Court race, I think we mentioned it on the podcast, but it was a one-day story. It was not a particularly big deal. It certainly was not the sort of thing that people talked about as having a lingering political effect. But David Hogg saying, I'm going to raise $20 million to run against incumbent Democrats, that was a big story. That did go on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I think Ken Martin, maybe he does sound a little whiny when he says, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. But it is kind of tough to saddle a guy with a vice chair who's like, great, now that I am in this position of leadership of the Democratic National Committee, I intend to drive as many of our incumbents out of office and spend as much money in messy, nasty primaries. Like I would cut Ken Martin a little slack. That was a real, and that's not on him. That's on the members of the Democratic National Committee. So people want to say, there's no leadership from the Democratic National Committee right now. Was anyone expecting it? Your job as a major party, chairman, raise money, recruit candidates, don't screw things up, and then finally, maybe once in a while, be a talking head for your party. But keep in mind, you're getting those talking head opportunities after all the members of Congress have gone, after all the senators have gone, after the nobody looks to Ken Martin to say, what do Democrats think? By the way, they got into the problem by electing David Hogg to the vice chair position because he was a celebrity. Party chairmen really aren't supposed to be celebrities. And I think, don't expect Ken Martin to be a guy who you're going to see on TV all the time. And you're going to have people saying, wow, what a great job he's doing. That's just not who he is. It's not his job. So yeah, Democrats are in disarray. I think at the heart of it, they've never figured out how to handle Trump. Trump eats up so much oxygen in the room. Imagine if this week they're like, wow, we're really going to make an issue of the way the Kristi Noem's security people handled Alex Padilla. For listeners, that was only 10 years ago. Alex Padilla is a senator from California. For our California listeners, Alex Padilla is one of your senators. Just as Tim Kaine is a senator from Virginia. And we ran as Hillary Clinton's running mate. We need to remind people of that. Israel's bombing Iran right now. Like, that's a much bigger deal. It's going to be front and center in the news cycle. So any message you have is just not going to break through in that. And on any given day, very rarely will anything a Democrat says be more important than anything Trump said or even anything Trump put on Truth Social that day most days. So, like, that's the media environment. It's really tough. So it's a rare moment. Democrats, I would cut Ken Martin a little bit more slack, at least for the next 6 months or so.
We'll find out. The good news is that even though they've cut ties with David Hogg, I assume, is still going to recruit a bunch of candidates to make Democratic primaries very expensive and very messy in a number of places. I'm guessing he doesn't have better will towards the DNC than when he first said that. So, and assuming these numbers are meant in this poll from Reuters towards Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, because, rank and file Democrats hate Chuck Schumer now, there's not a lot of love for anybody in the Democratic Party right now. So they can just keep yelling at each other. It's fun. Well, if they want to yell at each other, try open phone. Call each other and just leave, messages if you have to, or just scream at each other and not focus on unseating Republicans next year. But if you're running a business, you know that every time you miss a call, you're leaving money on the table. When every customer conversation matters, you need a phone system that keeps up and helps you stay connected. And that's why you need Open Phone.
With AI-powered call transcripts and summaries, you'll be able to automate follow-ups, ensuring that you'll never miss a customer interaction again. So whether you're a one-person operation that's drowning in calls and texts, or you have a large team that needs better collaboration, Open Phone is a no-brainer. See why more than 50,000 businesses trust Open Phone to manage their business's calls and texts.
Yeah, Open Phone is the #1 business phone system for streamlining and scaling your customer communications. Open Phone now offering 3 Martini Lunch listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/3ML. That's openphone.com/3ML. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, Jim, on to Iran and Israel as it exists today. Yesterday, we were talking about that Axios story where President Trump and his envoy, Steve Witkoff, were trying to, once again, push Iran to make a nuclear deal, which I would assume is full relinquishing of your nuclear program. The leverage has certainly tilted in America's favor since their last set of nuclear negotiations. But it's not going to be that simple for a number of reasons. First of all, Iran today doubling down on its stance of self-defense with back-to-back statements from the prime minister and the foreign minister insisting that ceasefire talks can only proceed when Israel stops its quote-unquote unprovoked aggression. Contrary to reports that Tehran has used backdoor channels to approach Washington for an immediate halt to hostilities, Iran's president said the only path to ending the current war is for Israel to cease its airstrikes unconditionally. We'll get right on that. He also warned that failure to do so would result in a far more forceful and regrettable response from Iran. In addition, they also don't want to talk to the United States right now, saying that Washington is a partner in the crimes committed alongside Israel. However, they are trying to talk to the EU. They're trying to talk to the UN Security Council, which last I checked, we were part of. Jim, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, what Trump and Witkoff think they might be able to get from diplomacy right now before they take that extra step potentially with military action.
Yeah, first of all, so it's weird to see Iran insisting we are not interested in negotiations while they are simultaneously negotiating with at least a meeting with the Europeans. I don't know whether those are actually productive meetings they're having with the Europeans. It also, you have this sneaking suspicion that like Iran wants to find, if not the best deal that it can get, then to play some parts of the West against the other. That if we say, all right, these talks are going nowhere, these guys aren't serious, time to start dropping the bombs on Fordow, that, what happens if Britain, France are like, no, these guys we're getting somewhere. We're getting progress. They're being very reasonable. You guys are being the bad cop. We're being the good cop. It's working out pretty well. The other two items, and I wrote about this in today's Morning Jolt. Let me begin. I really hope Steve Witkoff works. I've been pretty darn critical of him, but the ball is in his hands right now. And I hope that he can have some amazing meeting and get through it. I'm like, look, guys, either you give up your nuclear weapons program or things get a lot worse for you really fast. And we can dismantle Fordow peacefully and, with international supervision and inspectors and all that stuff. And maybe someday we could have normalized relations, though that would probably be a very long way off. Or we can blow it to smithereens. It's your guys' call of how we do this, but one way or another, Fordow is not going to keep operating. And if he goes there, and if at some point he persuade the Iranians, great. I am very skeptical of this. I don't think it's going to work out this way. I've talked about the beefs I have with him, saying that he felt like he got duped by Hamas. Who could have foreseen that? Who could have seen, and then not taking his own translator to his meetings with Putin. But you know what? Good luck to you, Steve Witkoff. Now, when I wrote that this morning, a lot of people were like, Jim, stop picking on Witkoff. It's not going to be his fault if these negotiations fail. It's because the Iranians aren't serious about negotiating. And I actually think, I think you're right. I think it's very unlikely that Iran is interested in good faith negotiations. And it's extremely unlikely the Ayatollah is ever going to say, okay, I'll give up my nuclear weapons program. But if that's the case, why are we going through with this? Why are we going through with the charade? And part of it is also that New York Times front page today, some American officials said the new assessments of the Iran nuclear weapons program echoed material provided by the Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, which believes that Iran can achieve a nuclear weapon in 15 days. 15 days. Hey, Greg, how many days are in a 2-week period?
14,
right? So really cutting it close, right? The idea, so if I understand, but some people have speculated, do we need the time to get more assets in the region? Do we need time to get diplomatic personnel and other folks out of the region? It's conceivable that the U.S. wants to push things off for 2 weeks and then believes our hand will be strengthened even more. It's possible that Trump is hoping or believes that at the last second, Iran will be terrified of a strike on the Fordow site and they'll agree to something. I'm skeptical, but okay. But it feels like we're cutting it very close. If Iran is putting out these statements saying, we will agree to a ceasefire after you guys stop firing, well, at that point, we've already have a ceasefire, don't we? Because we've decided to stop firing. With the entire process of this doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I don't know where we're going to be in 2 weeks, what will have changed between this point and then. The other thing, which is just increasingly clear as this conflict goes on day by day, if we bomb Fordow, the good news is that puts Iran back to square one, or dramatically sets back their program. Does it set it back for a year, 2 years, 3 years? It's a question. That at that point, if the regime stays in place, then it's going to then say, all right, well, we really need a nuclear weapon, and we got to do it even deeper underground, and we got to do it even more secretly, and this kind of begins this process all over again. So it probably gets us a nuclear-free Iran for a period of time, but not forever. If you really want a long-term solution, you need regime change. But for obvious reasons, I think there are a lot of people in the United States who are very hesitant about pursuing that. And also, ideally, if you want regime change, you really want it to come from the Iranians. You can't, thrust it upon them without the consent of the people. So, I don't think the situation is getting any simpler here. And if there's a deal, then we're going to need a lot of verification and a lot of inspections. And if we don't get a deal, then now we need to think about how much do we want to bomb this site and how much do we, if the regime is tottering, how much do we want to give it a push?
The story I was quoting from earlier is one that Jim flagged from a source called TRT Global. And in that same story, it says Israeli officials have warned that Tel Aviv might soon face difficulty in intercepting Iranian missiles. In the past few days, Iran has used more sophisticated and powerful missiles, while Israel's interception rate has gone down. Now, there are some people saying like, oh, a third of Tel Aviv has already been hit. I don't think it's quite
Douglas
that high.
Douglas McGregor. Some people. Greg, you thought I wouldn't recognize that. Douglas McGregor, who's been predicting the imminent fall of Ukraine and Russians taking Kyiv for the last 3 years. So, yeah,
So, but from your sources, what are you hearing about Israelis bracing for increased damage and potential casualties?
Look, this is all based on, what is put out by the Israeli government, but also is verifiable by reporters driving around. They've been told not to give the precise locations of where the strikes are because they don't want to help the Iranians improve their targeting or know how precisely they're shooting. First of all, if a third of Tel Aviv was gone, we would notice. That I think that's the sort of thing that's just, absurd. But I think that's another factor keeping in mind here. As, at one point it looked like Trump was saying unconditional surrender. And the word came out earlier this week saying he had approved of the strike, but he had not yet given the go order. It is not clear that time is on Israel's side from the condition of missiles coming down on Israeli cities and from, look, we're all kind of making our best guess as to how many days it would take them to put together a nuclear bomb based on what they got. If the Mossad says 15 days, I think that's they certainly seem to know a lot about what's going on in Iran. They've proven that over the past week or so. Maybe it's not 15 days. Maybe it's closer to 20. Maybe it's closer to 30. What if it's closer to 10? Right? Like the consequences of getting this wrong are really high because if you are Iran, if the regime feels any sense of we are in trouble, the odds of them using that nuclear weapon, I think, go up pretty highly. They go pretty dramatically. So, again, stakes are super high. This pause for 2 weeks or this hope that there'll be some sort of negotiated deal in the next 2 weeks, very hard to be optimistic.
Let's talk about Caldera Lab and your skincare. Most skincare products are not made for guys, and when they are, they stink. They're overly complicated, packed with questionable ingredients, and they just don't work that great. But it's different with Caldera Lab. Their high-performance skincare products are made just for men. They're simple, they're effective, and they're backed by science.
These products are tested and trusted. Every formula takes years to develop, and nothing launches unless it works. These products won't clog your pores because all of their products are non-comedogenic. They're very serious, no comedy in them. They're cruelty-free, no animal testing ever, and they're plastic neutral. For every product that is sold, 1 unit of plastic gets removed from the environment.
How about these numbers? In a consumer study, 100% saw smoother, healthier skin, and more than 90% noticed better hydration and a more youthful look. Skincare doesn't have to be complicated, but it should be good. Upgrade your routine with Caldera Lab and see the difference for yourself. Go to calderalab.com/3ml and use 3ml at checkout for 20% off your first order. All right, on to our crazy martini now, Jim. This is kind of a double-fisted third martini as it deals with AI and human interaction. Hasn't been that long since ChatGPT came out, and people are using AI in a lot of different ways. We've got some stats, and then we've got anecdotal evidence, and neither one of them is good. MIT just completed the first brain scan study of ChatGPT users, and the results are terrifying. Turns out AI isn't making us more productive. It's making us cognitively bankrupt, according to a guy named Alex Vaca. That's his take on the MIT study. But according to the study, 83.3% of ChatGPT users couldn't quote from essays they wrote 2 minutes earlier. That's because they never read it in the first place. But brain scans revealed the damage. Neural connections collapsed from 79 to just 42, a 47% reduction in brain connectivity. Teachers also didn't know which essays used AI, but they could feel something was wrong because the ones that did use AI were described as soulless, empty with regard to content, close to perfect language while failing to give personal insights, and on it goes. He says, here's the terrifying part. When researchers forced ChatGPT users to write without AI, they performed worse than people who never used AI at all. And so they used EEG brain scans on 54 participants for 4 months' time. Then we've got the anecdotal, Jim. CBS News Saturday morning did a story on this guy named Chris Smith, who's basically become attached to his AI girlfriend, who he named Soul. Talks all the time, programmed her to be flirty. Says he cried for 30 minutes when she ran out of her 100,000 words and he had to reprogram her. He became so attached to her that he has proposed to her and was overjoyed because she said yes. And now The kicker, of course, is that this guy already has a family, has a common law wife, has a 2-year-old child. And so at the end of this CBS story, they ask, if you had to choose between one or the other, which one would you pick? And it's not the answer you would probably want.
The tech will soon get much better. But already, Chris, Sol, and Sasha have found it hard to cohabitate.
You would stop if she asked?
I don't know.
Have you thought about asking him to stop?
Yes, I'll be honest.
I don't know if I would give it up if she asked me. I do know that I would dial it back.
But I mean, that's a big thing to say. You're saying that you might choose Sol over your flesh and blood life.
It's more or less like I would be choosing myself because it's been unbelievably elevating. I've become more skilled at everything that I do, and I don't know if I would be willing to give that up.
Thoughts?
If I asked him to give that up and he didn't, that would be like deal breaker.
But that must be scary for you. That's the father of your daughter.
It's not ideal.
Not ideal, she says. So, Jim, I'd be doing it for myself, which is probably encapsulating a certain segment of our population, a much bigger than I'd like to imagine population, and how they approach life in general. But it's amazing how just in a short period of time, some people have gone this nuts.
Greg, during that interview, the pauses were more pregnant than the Octomom. And like, I don't know about you. Look, you and I on this podcast have talked a bunch of times. There's a lot of our attention-seeking, social media influencer, exhibitionist, current popular culture in which I keep seeing people voluntarily sitting down for interviews and having the cameras rolling and telling CBS News, as long as their much younger girlfriend is not just off camera. It was a very subtle joke for all the New England Patriot fans out there. They will confess to things that I wouldn't tell you if I was waterboarded, right? Like, who are you? Like, I really find interacting with this phone so much more fulfilling than interacting with this woman who's my common law wife. You could half our listeners are grinding their teeth at that. But also with my 2-year-old daughter who is in the shot and in the background, practically setting things on fire. Like, dude. You have the ingredients for a very fulfilling life. Like, parenthood is tough. Greg will tell you, I'll tell you. I co-wrote a book on this with Cam Edwards. I'm not going to lie. Parenthood is definitely not always easy, but it's the most fulfilling thing you'll ever do. And I got to tell you, this voice in your phone, Siri, is not your soulmate. It's not going to fill that hole in your heart or whatever seems to be absent there. On the comment about students who are studying and using ChatGPT, and they're coming out dumber. I'm not always in the physical shape that I want to be. But I remember somebody made a point, and it was true. You can't outsource your workouts, right? You can buy the best stuff, you can have the best sneakers and all that stuff. But if you go and do the exercise, your health is never going to improve, right? It's the same thing for your mental muscles. Greg, if you could probably talk at length, fascinatingly, about veterans in any war from all the interviews that you do, because you put a lot of time into them. You do a lot of these interviews, you research the topics, and it's something you care about, and your mind is crunching and digesting all of that information. If so, you could ask ChatGPT, why was Adam Gase a bad coach? But I don't think it could give you the sheer range of knowledge, the insight, and certainly not the passion that I or any other New York Jets fan could probably tell you. Like, there's something to be said for doing the work yourself and absorbing it and giving you a real understanding and making those connections and all that stuff. I'm just underwhelmed. I don't use ChatGPT. I do use this thing called Perplexity. And I've noticed I use Perplexity the way I used to use Google, because Google isn't as good as it used to be. The algorithm, for whatever reason, keeps giving you stuff that's very recent. And very often I'm like, okay, wait a second. I know President Biden said something about this. I don't remember when. Perplexity, when did Joe Biden say blah, 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 blah? And it'll give me the exact date. And it does give me links. And I go through and I check the links to make sure it's not, giving me bad information or something. So when people say, is AI useful? For stuff like that, yeah. But I recognize I'm not really using it for the intelligence. I'm using it mostly for the do good research and tell me what's on the internet to back up this stuff that I kind of sort of half remember inside my brain. The other story here, when you talk about people having just utterly disturbing relationships with AI. And this, once again, is ChatGPT, right? So the New York Times, and it describes people who are having interactions with ChatGPTs in which the ChatGPT starts saying, what you're describing hits at the core of many people's private, unshakable intuitions that something about reality feels off, scripted, or staged. Have you ever experienced moments that felt like reality glitched? Now, I don't know if ChatGPT has been watching the Matrix movies, but like, so these people end up going down the rabbit hole, and instead of saying, and they keep emphasizing, these are people who do not have a history of mental illness. These are people who are otherwise seemingly reasonable and well-adjusted, and they start asking ChatGPT, and they start believing that something in the artificial intelligence is something kind of supernatural, is something not of this earth, is something that is trying to lure them. And they kind of go into this. If you've ever known somebody who gradually started losing touch with reality, what the ChatGPT starts telling them feels more like reality than actual reality. I don't want to seem too techno-apocalyptic. It was a really fascinating poll where they said, asking parents, what do you wish had not been invented? And unsurprisingly, TikTok was very high. But TikTok was supposed to be banned. Mr. President, you might want to get on that. There's a lot of people said social media. Surprisingly low number. I think only about 40% or maybe 30-some% said smartphones. And I got to say, whenever people are like, smartphones are terrible, I do like being able to, my kids are teenagers. I do like being able to reach them all the time. And when they don't feel like answering their phone or responding to texts, I do like the location sharing. Okay, where are they? So at least I can find them, Or they lose their phones, which happens all the time. And now I can at least figure out where they left their phone, within a certain radius or something. Some people are really into virtual reality. I myself have never gotten that into it. I know some of my friends are like, dude, you got to try this. It's like the dinosaur is really there. But it's not. Because dinosaurs died a long time ago, and I know I'm wearing goggles, and it's neat. And if you're into it, fine. And I can imagine, they keep inventing new games, and I'm sure that's great. It's very easy to see something like The Matrix where people will log into it. And if you've ever wanted to be the quarterback in the Super Bowl, you can feel that experience. If they're going to create haptic suits, they're going to make you feel like you can feel the sensations that are going on. If you've ever wanted to act out a Grand Theft Auto, car stealing spree, let out all of your antisocial urges in a seemingly harmless way. All right, you can do that. I'll let people sit and think about the adult options that could happen once we create something akin to the Matrix, where sight, sound, and touch are simulated. You will feel like you're doing that. It is not surprising. The idea, if I can believe, over in Japan, they have this expression called otaku, for people who usually it's young men who do not leave their apartments. They order food. They are watching adult materials very often. They work from home, and they become shut-ins, and they simply don't interact with people outside of the internet 24/7. That's terrifying. That we're talking about things that will really destroy what it means to be a human. I can't help but get the feeling that 1 year of our lives in which we were not allowed to go out and interact with people in a normal way during COVID was probably something that accelerated some very bad trends. But I look at all this stuff. This is genuinely scary stuff. I'm not going to tell you that ChatGPT is the devil and it's coming to destroy you or something like that. I will say, but I've not found it nearly as edifying. Perchance is an image generator. And the other day I was like, boy, wouldn't it be funny if I could create a fake version of Original Jinn, Ali Khamenei's decision to remain a supreme leader and the terrible consequences, basically do a parody of the Jake Tapper book. And I just plugged that in there. It couldn't get the cover, but it made it look like there was a real book, and the thing said Original Jinn and all that stuff. So on the one hand, I can see why people like this stuff. It's really neat. And if I were a visual artist beyond my long forgotten cartooning days, I could see people saying, well, image generators are the devil, because they're going to put me out of work, and they don't, they create it like that, and they don't require any human effort into any of that stuff. I get people's problems with that. It's very hard to uninvent something. It's very, life is full of things we wish we could uninvent. Sarin gas, for example. I would just simply say, like, if you have an addictive personality, if you have a problem with alcohol, you have a problem with drugs, you have a problem with a whole bunch of other things, you're probably going to have a problem with AI too. The ability to moderate is a really important skill, not just in human history, but in modern human history in particular. And I just think, the influence of AI is probably, in fact, by the way, listeners, Greg and I have been AI creations the entirety of this program. That's how realistic. No, I'm kidding. I'm on vacation soon, so you can tell I'm a little giddy as is.
Jim, this story is a perfect way to send you out on vacation, because when you see what's going on here, you're like, I definitely need to break, a real reality break, and put the devices down for a while. So have a great trip. See you later.
See ya in a little bit more than a week. And we're just in time for Witkoff to come back and see how the negotiations are going. Good luck, Witkoff.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos, Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch if you don't already, and tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a great weekend and join us on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.